Copan is in western Honduras in the Copan department, near to the Guatemalan border. Archaeologists believe that by 200 AD, there already was a prosperous tribal settlement in the valley of the Copan River, in the place where the ruins are today. The Copan Valley is 12.5 kilometers from east to west and 2.4 kilometers from north to south. Copan covers over 50 acres of temples, altars, stela, ball courts, several plazas, and a magnificent hieroglyphic stairway. It is believed that the originator of the Mayan dynasty established his rule approximately in 426 AD. He was called Kinik Yax Kukmo, which in the Maya language meant green Quetzal macaw or shining Quetzal macaw.
Well, from what we can tell, he's buried directly underneath Temple 16 at a much lower level. He seems to come from the area of the Petén, a very successful warrior, somebody who had proven himself in the battlefield. And I think he's sent to Copan on a mission. I think he comes to establish the city and annex important resources. I think one of the primary resources he was controlling here was jade, and the jade mines that are located in the Motagua River Valley.
Copan is the name by which the site has been known since 1576. We don't know the site's original name at all, but new advances in Maya epigraphy have led to a possible reading of the Copan emblem glyph. It may be read as corner, summit, or motmot, possibly referring to Copan's position as the easternmost borders of the Maya world. However, the emblem glyph is represented by a bat or sots in Mayan.
The city was abandoned at about 850 AD. It's when it really enters in a very serious decline. But we have archaeological remains that go into the 1200 AD, and then other kinds of offerings that are still made at the site after that.
The ruins of the Copan are one of the most important sites of the Mayan civilization. This is the site of a major Maya kingdom of the classic era, 5th to 9th centuries. With beautifully carved monuments and temple pyramids rising from the jungle and representative today of what Athens is to the Old World, the cradle of its civilization. Because of this and other reasons, UNESCO declared it a World Heritage Site in 1980. The majority of archaeologists agree that Copan formed part of the 3 largest and most lavish cultural centers of the New World. The other 2 are Tikal and Palenque. The rulers of Copan were able to sustain their political and military power for 650 years, with a dynasty of 16 kings overseeing the city's expansion. Gradually, Copan gained more military and political importance within the Maya world. The city prospered and its population grew. There was the construction of greater and more ambitious ceremonial buildings, and the commissioning of lavish works of art as in other cities in the Maya world. New temples were built on top of older ones, with each iteration being larger and taller than the previous one. Historians believed great cities like Copan were ceremonial centers where the priests lived, while the rest of the population dwelt in distant villages, visiting the plazas only to watch important rites. Elaborate hieroglyphic texts were thought to be astronomical predictions and human figurines depicting Maya gods. It is now known that these writings refer to local historical events and principally the lives and achievements of kings who are portrayed through carvings on stela. Most of the temples and structures which we can see in this site date from the 8th century. The final ruler of Copan, Yu Sit Tok, came to power in AD 822. About this time, the kingdom began to diminish. A symbol of this tragic downfall is Altar El, which in AD 822 the king commissioned a monument to represent his time in power. However, it was never completed. Yet, despite its importance, Copan went into decline. Across the vast territory of the ancient Maya, other important sites were sharing a similar fate. Classic Maya civilization was collapsing. All evidence suggests that the Maya simply abandoned Copan. By 900 AD, only a tenth of the population was still present in the valley. Over the following centuries, the jungle remained the land that it had once given to the Maya for them to build their great city. If we put it in our cultural terms, Tikal was like New York and Copan was like Paris. The effort was continued by the Instituto Hondureño de Antropología e Historia, Honduran Institute of Anthropology and History, a project involving American and Honduran archaeologists named Proyecto Arqueológico Copan was started in 1977 and carries on to this day.
Major public works directed by the king and the upper echelons of the Maya state that would allow the construction, the design, the building of these important sites. They were very important symbolically too. They represented a sacred landscape for the ancient Maya, so it was a very important part of their religious belief system. We have to remember, of course, that there was no division between the state and the church in ancient Maya society. They were both embodied by the king.
The Acropolis. The Maya kings of Copan were not interested in moving mountains. They preferred to create their own. The Mayas took their time to create their ceremonial centers, which keep well today. Their keen attention to detail is evident as you admire their painted murals and the beauty of their work in jade, ceramic, and stone, like the pyramid known as Temple 16. Rising 100 feet above the city's great plaza, it is the highest point among a group of holy buildings that archaeologists have dubbed the Acropolis.
Probably the most outstanding feature of Copan is its sculpture. And I think it had to do with a number of elements. A principal among them is the fact that we had the raw materials, that we had this volcanic tuff, which is fairly easy to quarry and fairly easy to carve. But then the other tremendous element, which I think is equally as important, is the human talent. And that is the fact of the matter is that the artisans, the artists that we had at Copan were really very, very talented human beings. And so the combination of having the raw materials and having the human talent to develop this very sophisticated style of sculpture is really something that gave Copan its very special flavor and made it, or makes it, outstanding within all of the other, 50 or 60 other major Maya sites they get in the entire Maya area. I really feel confident in saying that no other site has such outstanding beauty in carved stone as Copan does. And that's why we have built our sculpture museum here in Copan in honor of this outstanding talent of the Maya. There are obviously many other areas in which such a talent would have been projected, for example, wood carving, things like that. But those organic materials disappear. And maybe, maybe Tikal and Palenque had equally beautiful sculpture carved in wood, but it's disappeared. And then the place who had, I guess, the best stone to work with was Copan.
The Acropolis was the royal complex at the heart of Copan, divided in two large plazas, the West Court and the East Court. The West Court houses Temple 11 and Temple 16 with altar Q set at its base. Temple 11 was built as a portal to the other world. Temple 16 sits in between the East and the West Court. It was built on top of a previous temple without damaging it. Altar Q depicts the 16 members of the Copan dynasty. This large square block of carved stone portrays 16 seated men, 4 on each side. These figures represent the members of a dynastic lineage of 16 kings whose rule spanned nearly 4 centuries before AD 426 to approximately 820 AD, during the Classic period. When archaeologists were able to actually decipher Maya hieroglyphs, these anonymous characters were suddenly transformed into real people. David Stewart discovered his name hidden in plain sight, Kinik Yakuk Mo, and that's the name of the founder of Copan. They finally had the name of the first king, the first figure, the one who anoints the 16th king with the baton of office, sits on the glyph that represents the Maya word Lord. The dynasty came to an end with the end of Yashpak, first Don, who built Altarquio. Its importance lies in that not only is it one of the most elaborate examples of Maya artwork found on the site, but also in that it is a historical document that depicts all 16 known kings of Copan in carved stone. It was used for sacrifices during special ceremonies by the high priest of Copan. There's an idea of a beginning and an end, as if anything that comes after the 16th ruler is somehow out of order or would begin some sort of new history, some new sense of a new beginning. Copan is perhaps best known for producing and built their temples one on top of the other, leaving parts of the old buildings inside the new structures. For over 20 years, archaeologist Ricardo Agurcia has tunneled into these temples, where he discovered a king's tomb. A new royal Maya tomb emerges from the tunnels beneath Copan's Acropolis. Archaeologists have dug more than 2 miles of tunnels through the Acropolis. The focus of royal power, the Acropolis, is a collection of massive pyramidal structures, beneath which lies a wealth of information about Copan. It is the site of current archaeological research and the most impressive substructure discovered here in the Rosalila temple. Rosalila is underneath structure 16. It is the temple of the early Classic period. It is the most completely preserved example of the art and architecture of this period discovered to date. It was a building dedicated to Kinik Yakuk Mo. Ricardo Agurcia, the director of a research and sustainable tourism organization called the Copan Association, discovered Rosalila in 1989.
This is how I came across Rosalila, is excavating tunnels, gathering archaeological information about the earlier constructions. And the fascinating thing about Rosalila is that it is pretty much entirely preserved, which was totally unusual. I mean, they would tear these buildings down completely before they built another one on top. The case of Rosalila then is a unique example. It is also our complete text, our handbook of the art and architecture of Copan, because the last buildings that existed that were left here after the city is abandoned were destroyed by nature.
Finding Rosalila revolutionized what was known of the city's early history and the Maya southern frontier. Rosalila sits in the middle of a long sequence of constructions built over 400 years by the ancient Maya. It is built in the year 571 AD by Mun Jaguar, the 10th ruler of Copan. Unlike all other buildings in the central axis of the Copan Acropolis, it is dedicated to the memory of the founder of the dynasty, Kinik Yakuk Mo. But unlike all other buildings in this long sequence of constructions, Rosalila is the only one that's completely and entirely preserved. It is in fact embalmed by the ancient Maya and reflects the art and architecture, as well as the religious thought of the ancient Maya like no other building does. The Sun King's face adorns the first floor of Rosalila, a temple that was once painted a brilliant, bloody shade of red. His image wears a headdress of red, yellow, and green plumage, the feathers of a quetzal and a macaw. Curving lines in his eyes associate him with the depictions of the sun god. The Maya words for each of these sculptural elements spell his name, Kinik Yakuk Mo, which translates as sun-eyed, resplendent quetzal macaw, the first king of Copan.